Hello and welcome back to the IT training video series. Today's video is going to be a little bit different than some of the ones we've done in the past. I've gotten a couple of requests to talk about what the future of enterprise might look like on ChromeOS versus, say, Windows or Apple. And what I wanted to do is do a couple of specific case studies today to explain the flexibility of ChromeOS to people who may think it's slightly more rigid than it is. I would say that in its initial version, I guess is the right word, it definitely was a more rigid and very straightforward application. It was, do you want to do some light web browsing? If you do, here's a solution for you. And that was pretty much it. Lately, especially though, I think there's been a lot of new functionality added, and that new functionality has proven to be really, really useful. So I've got 4 specific examples of exactly what I mean by that. And we're going to talk about those and how they might apply to enterprise. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is what's called crossover. So crossover is an emulator that you can use on ChromeOS to run Windows applications. And it's hard to explain why that would be useful. So what I'm going to do instead is show you. So crossover is an Android application, actually. And so what you do is you download it from the Play Store as opposed to the Chrome Web Store. Now, again, for those who haven't seen previous videos, this is a managed Chromebook device. So it does have a more limited view than, say, one out of the box that you own at home. And one of those examples is that this list of apps, for example, is all whitelisted apps. These are things that I've specifically allowed to be downloaded and run on Chromebooks within the domain. If you have a personal Chromebook, you can run the Play Store, but first you need to actually download this application. It's this one here. Let me see if I can make it a little bit bigger. This one right here, Play Store. So you can get that from the Chrome Web Store, and then you get the Play Store. And the differentiation there is the Play Store is intended for Android apps that run on Chrome OS, whereas the Web Store is apps that were developed for Chrome OS or extensions for Chrome, things like that. That's the important distinction there. I have another video where I talk about these 3 right here, which obviously are Microsoft Office apps that you would be used to. The interesting part I want to note about those is that these versions are somewhat light, that being that they don't run some of the features you might be used to seeing in the Office suite. So an example would be things like mail merge. Mail merge is not something that you can do within this version, at least not in a way that I've found, or not in a way that makes sense. So let's talk about some things that do work, though. And for what it's worth, as a side note on that, you can run Office 365 using office.com. The trick would be, how do you get full functionality out of an offline device, an offline Chromebook? And that's where it becomes challenging. But again, if you want more information about that, please check out that video. It's called Installing Microsoft Office Apps on a Chromebook. So we're going to talk about this app right here. This is called Crossover. So Crossover is developed by Codeweavers. And again, all it is it's essentially an emulator that runs Windows applications on Chrome. So we're going to go ahead and install that. And while that's downloading, I'm going to talk about exactly what's going to happen here. So Crossover is now installed. So what I'm going to do is launch the application. And this is what it looks like. And what it's going to ask is to allow you access to files. The reason being that it's going to be looking for Windows compatible installation files so that it can actually run them. And we'll hit allow on this one as well. So what it's doing is extracting files for the installation now. So the first thing we're going to do is search applications. In this specific part of the application, in my opinion, could be a little bit better. It's not really clear how to install something right off the bat. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to type Parallels, because that's what we're going to actually end up installing. So if you search it, sometimes you'll get lucky and see that there's an already readily available installer for what you're looking for, and you can pull it directly from that search box. However, in this case, there's not. So what we're going to do is do Install Unlisted Application. We're going to go select Installer. You can actually hit this refresh button here to look for installable files. And what you'll see is that this file I have downloaded is called 2xclient.msi. And again, it's like an exe, but it's a deployable via group policy object. It's pretty much the same thing as far as we're concerned here. So I'm going to go ahead and hit install. And as you can see, what it's doing is actually running the installation for a Windows installer file within this program called Crossover. So as you can see, what you actually get is the pop-up that looks like a Windows station. So welcome to Parallels Client Setup Wizard. We'll hit next. And this is exactly what it looks like on a Windows computer, having done it before. One thing I will say is that when you run it in an emulator, this file path right here is definitely not something you want to be messing with. So you're going to want to leave that exactly as it is. So we'll hit next. We're going to skip this part of it, which is what we do normally. We'll hit install. And it's actually going to take us to this spot right here, which is the actual client itself. And you can do advanced settings. This is exactly what it looks like on a Windows machine. Now, this could be used for any number of different kinds of remote desktop emulators, I would imagine. I have found a few programs that specifically that don't work, and some of them are somewhat obscure. One of them is called Visograph, and it's a sort of an eye tracking program. When I contacted the developers about why it might not be working, they said that there could be some background component that doesn't work particularly well. One of the examples they gave was Java. So this is not meant to be a catch-all that runs anything at any time. I'm going to go ahead and close these windows here. When you click on your apps here, you'll actually have that new app that you installed as its own thing. And if you watch, I can actually launch it here in its own window. You can maximize it, go connections, you can go file, new connection. You can set them up as a remote connection in different modes, et cetera, et cetera. And so that is case study number 1, okay? So that's the first thing. Now we're going to talk about kind of a weird situation that I've occasionally run into. And that is with a program called Zoom. So one of the strange things about Zoom, though, is how difficult it was to get it to work on a Chromebook. I mean, it just doesn't seem like it really should be something that shouldn't work on a Chromebook. So what you can do is Zoom. This is how I discovered what the problem was. If you go to Zoom test meeting, what you can do is actually get to the website for Zoom, as you can see here. And in order to test your settings, you can actually join a test meeting. And then what you have to do is actually add Zoom to Chrome as an extension in order to get it to run. So I said, okay, that's no problem. But when you go to install it, one of the interesting things is you get this block right here that says not compatible. So if you mouse over it, it says it's not supported on this computer and it's been disabled because of the following problems. It uses 3D graphics and needs the web graphics library. Now, that's a whole other issue about why exactly that is. I don't know why it necessarily needs those things, but it does. And so here we are. And instead, what we're able to do is go about this a slightly different way. So what I'm going to do is actually go to the Play Store icon down here. Once again, we're going to go back. And then as you can see, I actually whitelisted the Android version of this application, and you can install it that way instead. So it's 36 megs, something like that. But what we're going to do is we're going to run it sort of in a roundabout different way. And it's installing it instead as an extension. It's installing it as an actual application, like an offline application. Once we've installed it here, then you can actually go and maximize it. And you can see that Zoom has been installed. So once you open it, there it is. So you can go join a meeting, meeting ID, and the application itself runs just fine if you install it from the Play Store, but you can't install the extension version of it that runs in Chrome because of the web graphics library. So that was another interesting success that was kind of slightly more anticlimactic than I thought it was going to be. But nonetheless, it did work. So that's the second of 4 examples specifically about business-facing applications. The next 2 things we're going to talk about are remote desktop, and in particular, something that's a little more applicable to someone like myself who's an IT director is going to be offline serial and console access. So let's talk about those 2 things next. So the last 2 examples that we're going to talk about here are actually slightly more IT-focused examples. And they involve tools that I use on a daily basis that I think at first glance, even I thought were probably not best used on a Chromebook, mainly because of the tools available. Fortunately, I believe I've been proven wrong on that front several times, actually. And the first one that we're going to talk about is a tool that a lot of people are probably familiar with, and that's Remote Desktop. Now, Remote Desktop is used frequently by IT professionals like myself, but is also used, might actually be used by employees at all levels, accessing remote machines, running a script or doing an export, accessing remote files, things like that. So we're going to talk about that right now. Now, there are several Remote Desktop applications available. I'm going to talk about the one that I prefer to use, and it's called Chrome RDP. There's also Chrome Remote Desktop, which is great, and that's more of a allow remote access, maybe remote help might be the easier way to think about it, which is good, and I do have that added. But the one I'm actually referring to is this one right here, Chrome RDP. I'm going to go ahead and add this application here, and then I'm going to show you very simply exactly how it works. So if I launch it, let me go ahead and pin it to my shelf here. I'm going to launch Chrome RDP, and this is what it looks like. Now, one of the neat things that's a little quirky as well about this application is that you can run it in full screen mode. So you can actually get rid of your shelf at the bottom of the screen so that you can have a full screen view of a remote server or something like that. The problem with doing that is that you have to toggle full screen before you connect to a server. Because it renders it at that existing resolution. So just as a quick note, you might want to note these options up here at the right, and there's a toggle full screen, and you can turn that on and off. I do like using it in full screen. It gives me a little bit more to work with. So what I'm going to do is connect to a remote server that I have set up here, just as an example. Make sure that it's the correct one, but you can see that it's the IP address of the server at port 3389, which is the standard remote desktop port. Is that I have a full Windows Server interface. I can interact with it. I can open Google Chrome here. As you can see, runs perfectly normal. I do have Excel, PowerPoint. I've got Bitvise here so that I can run SSH. This server I actually use for remote access, and I will occasionally log in remotely, either from home or somewhere outside of the bounds of the office buildings, to either check on the health of something, run updates after hours, reboot a device, something like that. So I use this as a remote access capable machine. And so I have an SSH client for that purpose. But as you can see, it is a full Windows Server interface. I can click on here and you can see it's the full Windows Server start menu. We've got administrative tools. You can run to control panel. Anything that you need to do, you can run Windows updates. So it's a pretty neat thing, and I do have that set up. So information about setting that up, there's quite a bit more to it than it sounds like there is. But from this top menu here, you can actually disconnect. You can run a Control-Alt-Delete, since obviously you may not have those keys on your keyboard directly. But what I'm going to do here is just select Sign Out, and you'll see it'll kick you back out. And from this last screen, you can actually bookmark the IP address of the server that you've chosen, and then it's there available for you in the future. One of the few complaints that I have about this is it'd be nice to give friendly names to the IPs, but nonetheless, it's still helpful for me. I still know every server that I would connect to by IP as far as what it does. So it's not as huge of an issue for me. But if you had, say, remote employees who are not necessarily IT professionals who are trying to connect, they may get certain IP addresses mixed up if they don't use them as often. So it could present a problem there. But again, not really a deal breaker. Overall, the client works extremely well, and I'm quite happy with it. So the last app that I want to talk about that I feel like really comes in handy, particularly for me, is called BeagleTerm. And BeagleTerm is an emulator. It's an application that runs a direct serial connection to serial capable devices. So I'm going to show you what I'm talking about here. Probably my favorite Chrome app because of how useful it is in a pinch. And you'll see here that it's a pretty funny looking application actually too. But what I use this for is I use this as a an app to do direct serial connection into the console port of managed switches or any device that has a console port, actually. So if you click on this, it'll actually give you options for connecting. And you can't see it obviously on the screen, but right now I actually have a USB to serial adapter plugged in, and then a serial to console cable plugged into a managed network switch here on my desk. So all you need to do is know the connection properties of what you're connecting to, which I do know. And the only thing I need to change here is the bitrate. But this dev TTY USB 0 is the device that's plugged in. Again, that's slightly more upper level. I definitely understand that. But once you hit connect, what you'll be able to do is hit enter here a couple of times. I'm going to make it full screen actually. And you'll see that it's come up there. This is a brand new, fresh out of the box, managed Aruba switch. And if I hit any key, you can see that it actually gives you the direct console command prompt so that you can enter in command line interface. So for example, I could do, we'll go into the config mode here, and then we'll go host name, IT training. Whoop. So I'm going to need an underscore here. Oh, that's right. You can't use underscores anymore. It's hyphens now. And then you'll see there it's changed the name. You can go show run. And there you go. That's the default configuration. Obviously, I haven't done anything to this switch yet. It's fresh out of the box. But it is a managed 24-port switch with 4 SFP interfaces. And this is something that I have been able to do with the Chromebook for a number of months now. So I'll carry it around with me. I have this USB to serial converter, and I can plug it directly into a switch. If I have a major outage, I can plug in locally. I don't need network access. I've done this a number of times with no Wi-Fi. So you can pull up the app. It's runs completely offline, and you can talk to switches. You can check configs. You can do a full wipe and rebuild on the fly. But all this can be done with a Chromebook, something that would have seemed impossible to me, even a year ago. So that's the final example that I have here. There are so many more examples of how Chrome is great for enterprise facing, but it's also important to note that there's some things it's not as good for. And a few specific examples would be really heavy media editing, videos and photos especially. I think that most Chrome OS devices are going to be a little underpowered for some heavy workloads when it comes to especially video processing and photo processing. But there's another one that actually applies as well, and it's the IDEs for programming like Python. And so I think it's important to consider those things. But overall, I think they're great in the future of enterprise devices. Please stay tuned for more videos, and I'll be adding them as I can.